Assalamu alaikum. Today's video is about a very famous topic of paper 4, A-level economics, consumers equilibrium. So I have created a question over here, and this question is evaluate the extent to which indifference curve analysis can be used to determine that the PED for normal goods is more than the PED for inferior goods. A similar question has been asked in a previous exam paper. I like to emphasize on this question. So before we proceed further, the first thing we need to do in this essay is definition and explanation of consumer equilibrium. Consumer equilibrium is a consumer reaches his or her equilibrium when he allocates his resources in a manner that his total utility is maximized. And there is no possible increase in the total revenue even if resources are reallocated. So total utility, maximizing total utility is consumer equilibrium. And that will be the point where there will not be any tendency to reallocate or tendency to change the allocation of resources. Mathematically, it happens, total utility is maximized and consumer equilibrium is reached where MU per dollar is equal, MU per dollar for large units of all commodities is equal. Assuming this customer is buying only two goods, A and B, the total utility will be maximized where MU per dollar, that is marginality of good A divided by price of A, is equal to marginality per dollar for good B, that is marginality of product B divided by price of product B. Now that's a mathematical treatment. Now we proceed further with now we do try to explain the concept of consumer equilibrium with the help of indifference curve and budget line. This is the requirement of this question. So what is indifference curve? Indifference curve shows combinations of two goods that provides same utility to the consumer. If you want to remember two keywords, same utility. All combinations along an indifference curve provide same total utility to the consumers. And a consumer cannot prefer one combination over another since total utility is the same for every combination and consumer is indifferent. So to show indifference curve graphically, we take a diagram where we assume there are two goods, good X and good Y. And indifference curve is downward sloping, but it is not a straight line. It is not a straight line. It is a curve which is steeper initially, but it becomes more and more flat. The slope of indifference curve is MU of X and MU divided by MU of product Y. And it is also known as marginal rate of substitution, the rate at which a consumer is willing to substitute one unit of the rate at which consumer is willing to substitute X with Y. MU of X over MU of Y. We know that if we buy more of X and fewer of Y, more units of good X and fewer units of good Y, MU of X would fall as per law of diminishing marginal utility. More units of a product will result in diminishing marginal utility. Fewer units of a product result in higher marginality of the product. So that shows that the slope of indifference curve will not be constant. Whenever we move along this curve, we move from point A to point B, marginal utility of X divided by marginality of Y, that is the slope of indifference curve, will fall and indifference curve will become flat. So you can, in the initial paragraph, you have said what is consumer equilibrium, how can we calculate it mathematically, and then you are talking about indifference curve and the slope of indifference curve and why is the slope of indifference curve not constant. So after explaining this, we move on and discuss what is budget line. Budget line shows combinations of two goods that a consumer can purchase with given income and at given prices. So good X and good Y, and budget line is a straight line. The slope of budget line is Px over Py. Slope of budget line, I am writing the abbreviation budget line BL. So Px over Py is the slope of budget line. Since we are assuming that prices remain unchanged, irrespective of the quantity you purchase, you buy 1 unit of X or you buy 20 unit of X, the price per unit of X remains unchanged. So Px over Py, the ratio of that will also be a constant, and that would result in a straight line budget line, since the slope of budget line is Px over Py. So after knowing what is the slope of budget line and what is the slope of indifference curve, we now try to show consumer equilibrium graphically. And to show that, we have to draw both diagrams together, good X and good Y. Budget line, straight line, indifference curve, steeper and then becoming flatter. This is the equilibrium. This is the quantity of X1 and this is the quantity of Y, that is Y1. This is consumer equilibrium because budget line and indifference curve are tangent. The slope of budget line is equal to the slope of budget line. Tangency means that the two curves which are tangent have identical slopes. So mu of X over mu of Y is slope of indifference curve. Price of X over price of Y is the slope of budget line. So when they are tangent, they are equal. And if you can do this cross multiplication, you can prove that the initial equation we made, that mathematically it is proven that marginality of per dollar must be equal for all units for consumer utility to be maximized. So this is marginality of X per dollar, it is marginality of Y per dollar, and it is similar to the tangency or indifference curve and budget line. So that is how we can show consumer equilibrium. So there are three explanations you need to give. What is consumer equilibrium? One, consumer equilibrium is where total utility is maximized and there is no tendency to change and reallocate resources. Number two, mathematically, it is a point where marginality per dollar is same for last unit of all commodities. Number three, graphically, it is where indifference curve and budget line are tangent. Now we discuss the impact of change in price over this consumer equilibrium. If the price changes, people change the quantity they buy, and that will be the price effect. Price effect is the effect of a change in price of a product over the quantity demanded of that product. So if we draw this diagram, again, good X, good Y, budget line, indifference curve, this is B1, the initial budget line. Due to the drop in the price of good X, X becomes more affordable. Why? The affordability does not change because we are assuming only the price of good X has fallen. So in that case, the budget line will pivotally shift and it will be B2. And there will be another indifference curve which will show the initial equilibrium is E1, the next equilibrium is E2. Initially, you were buying quantity X1, now you are buying quantity of good X2. So due to the decrease in the price of good X, budget line has shifted from B1 to B2 and quantity demanded of good X has risen from X1 to X2, and we can actually show it through a graph on demand curve, or we make sure that this is a quantity and the price of X is quantity of X. Since price of X has fallen from, let's say, P1 to P2, the quantity of X has risen from X1 to X2. If we make these 2 points together, we can get a downward sloping demand curve. A downward sloping demand curve is because price effect is negative. When prices rise, quantity demanded usually falls. But does it always happen? We elaborate this. In order to understand the impact of response of consumer to a change in the price of a product, we need to separate this price effect into substitution effect and into income effect. So what is the substitution effect and what is income effect? We talk about that now. Price effect PE is equal to substitution effect SE and income effect IE. So I'm using the abbreviation, but I'm using the proper complete words as well so that you're familiar with this. PE is the combination, is the total of substitution effect and income effect. Briefly speaking, substitution effect is because of the change in relative prices of good X and good Y. People buy more of those goods whose prices are relatively cheaper, and they buy fewer of those goods whose prices are relatively expensive. So relative price determines substitution effect. Income effect is because of the real income, that is affordability. If people afford more of a product, they may buy more of that. If their income goes up, they may buy more of some products, but maybe less of the other. We'll explain that after a few moments. Relative price. Who gives the relative price? If you remember, the slope of budget line is Px or Py. So remember, substitution effect is explained with the help of the slope of indifference curve. So a slope of budget line. The relative price is reflected by the ratio of Px over Py, and that is the slope of budget line. So relative price is because of the impact of the relative price is reflected by the change in the slope of budget line. So substitution effect is slope of budget line. Whereas income fact, if we have higher income, budget line will be higher. Budget line shows our affordability. More income means more affordability and a higher budget line. So income fact is shown by the position of budget line. Position of budget line. Whereas substitution effect is the slope of budget line. Remember these two things, that in order to understand what is substitution effect, look at the slope of budget line. And in order to understand what is the real income effect, look at the position of the budget line. So let's redraw the diagram we just drew a moment ago. Good X, good Y, budget line, indifference curve, B1. So this is initial equilibrium. E1, quantity of X1 and quantity of good Y is Y1. Due to the decrease in the price of good X, budget line shifts to B2. If we now look at, if we compare B1 with B2, two things have changed. One, the slope of budget line is B2 is different. It is more flat. Whereas position of budget line has also changed. So position that shows income fact, that has changed. Slope that shows substitution effect, that has also changed. So this shift of B2 shows both substitution as well as income fact. To show them separately, now that's a very important part of our discussion. To show income fact and substitution fact separately, we need to draw a hypothetical line. A hypothetical line will be drawn so that at least one of the factors is put in isolation, that we say that we want to see only the substitution fact or we want to see only the income fact. So in order to only see the substitution fact, we have to draw a line that is hypothetical, but that is parallel to the new budget line, so that it gives us the new price ratio of X and Y. But it is tangent to the older indifference curve, so that total utility does not change, means income does not change. Income could be defined in two ways: ability to get utility. So we are drawing a hypothetical line which has two features. One, it is parallel to the new budget line, and it is tangent to the older indifference curve, that is B3. This blue line is a hypothetical line. It is not because of our change in affordability. We are only drawing it just to separate substitution effect and income fact. So if we look at B3, so new equilibrium is E2 and the new quantity demanded is X2. Why did we move from E1 to E2? Both points lie on the same indifference curve, meaning both points provide same utility and both points show same income level. Same satisfaction level means same income level. There is no change in real income, there is no change in satisfaction. But why did we move from E1 to E2? Only because of one thing, and that is B3 is flatter compared to B1, meaning its slope is less, meaning Px over Py is less, meaning as X is good X is relatively cheaper. So we are buying more of good X only because X is relatively cheaper. So this is the substitution effect. Substitution effect is always the same for all types of goods. It is the same for every type of good. Whenever a product seems relatively cheaper, people buy more of it. Whenever a product becomes relatively expensive, people buy fewer units of that. So this will always operate in the same direction. But the tricky part is income fact. Income fact moves differently or acts differently for different types of goods. First of all, we talk about normal goods. Normal goods are those whose demand rises with income. If income goes up, their demand goes up. Income fact for normal goods is positive. That is, higher income, higher demand. So in case X is a normal good, income has gone up. If we compare B3 to B2, slopes are identical. B3 and B2 are parallel. There is no change in the relative price. The only change between B3 and B2, at B2 income is higher. So at higher income, if we buy more of good X, X would be normal. In that case, the new equilibrium will be probably towards somewhere in this range, area 1 and area 2, somewhere here, maybe here. So if over here, it is a normal good, N, normal good. And the quantity demanded would be to the right of X2. New quantity would be to the right of X2. In this case, substitution effect has raised the demand from X1 to X2. Income fact has also raised the demand from X2 to a point that is right to the right of X2. Both substitution effect and income fact have acted in the same direction. For normal goods, substitution effect and income fact move in the same direction. However, if the product is a necessity, essential good, income fact would be 0. Because of the increase in income that is shown by a shift from B3 to B2, there is no change in the demand for good. Because of substitution effect, demand has risen. But because of income fact, demand won't change. In that case, the equilibrium point will be exactly at this point, and that could be shown as E, essential good. Essential goods, there won't be any change in demand as far as the income fact is concerned. But due to substitution effect, the demand has risen. The net effect of the demand, net effect on demand is the demand has gone up from X1 to X2, but the change in demand for necessities is less than the change in demand for normal goods. For normal goods, demand has gone up from X1 to a point to the right of X2, whereas for essential goods, it has gone up only from X1 to X2. That is why we can say PED for normal goods is more than the PED for necessities, because there will be a proportionately larger change, increase in quantity demanded of a normal good compared to a increase in the demand for a necessity. For necessities, income fact is 0, substitution effect raises the demand. Whereas for normal goods, both substitution effect and income fact raise the demand. Now we move to the negative income fact, that is inferior goods. And we take a point over here, point 3. In case good X is an inferior good, income fact would be negative. Higher income would mean lower demand for good X. As far as the substitution fact is concerned, as I've told earlier, it will be the same for every type of good. So as far as substitution fact is concerned, demand would rise from X1 to X2, but for inferior goods, income fact will lower the demand, and the new equilibrium will be to the left of X2. Maybe over here, this point, inferior goods, I. Now, if we look at this, for inferior goods, substitution effect and income fact have moved in opposite directions. Substitution effect has tried to raise the demand. Income fact has lowered the demand. Net effect on demand, since substitution effect is stronger, income fact is weaker, net effect on demand, the demand will still go up. So for inferior goods, demand curve could still be downward sloping provided negative income fact is weaker than substitution effect. But in case negative income fact is stronger than substitution effect, the new equilibrium could be to the left of X1. If it is to the left of X1, that is given good. In this case, what happened? Substitution effect raised the demand from X1 to X2, but stronger negative income fact brought it down from X1 to somewhere to the left of X1. In this case, for given good, demand would rise when price rises, because demand will fall when price falls. Price has fallen, the demand has fallen as well. Upward rising demand curve, exceptional case. So, briefly speaking, substitution effect is same for every time. This is a paragraph you can write in the examination paper. That price effect is divided into two parts, substitution effect and income fact. Substitution effect is reflected by the slope of budget line, income fact is reflected by the position of the budget line. To separate price effect, to separate substitution fact and income fact, and to divide price effect into substitution and income fact, we draw a hypothetical line that is tangent to the older indifference curve but parallel to the new budget line. Substitution fact is always the same for every type of good, and due to the decrease in the price, if X becomes or good X becomes relatively cheaper, demand for X will always rise as far as the substitution fact is concerned. Income fact, however, is different for different types of goods. For normal goods, income fact is positive. Higher income would mean higher demand. In this case, substitution fact and income fact reinforce each other and they both raise the demand if price of good X falls, and demand curve would be flat and PD will be very high. In a case of essential goods, necessity goods, income fact would be 0. Demand would still go up because of substitution effect, but income fact will not change the demand. Demand for necessities will still rise because of a fall in price of good X, but the change in demand would be relatively smaller than the change in demand compared in the case of normal good. So demand curve for necessities would be steeper compared to the demand curve for normal goods. Inferior goods, income fact is negative. Income goes up, demand goes down. In this case, substitution fact raises the demand, income fact lowers it. So income fact and substitution fact move in opposite directions. What will be the net impact on demand? It depends upon the relative strength of income fact and substitution fact. If income fact is weaker, the fall in demand will be smaller, whereas the rise in demand due to substitution fact will be higher, and demand curve would still be downward sloping. However, this demand curve would be steeper than the demand curve for necessities and demand curve for normal goods, as the demand increase is rising because of substitution effect, but demand is falling because of income fact. So the change in demand would be quite less compared to the other two types of goods. So that is why PED for inferior goods would be lower than the PED for necessities or PED for the normal goods. Last but not the least, Giffen goods is an exceptional case where income fact is so strong, negative income fact is so strong that it outweighs the substitution effect. So substitution effect raises demand, income fact lowers it, and not only lowers it, it actually outweighs the possible increase in demand because of substitution effect. In that case, Giffen good will have an upward rising demand curve. Low price would mean low overall demand. And so every Giffen good must be inferior because every Giffen is inferior because Giffen goods must have negative income fact, and the other quality which Giffen goods should have, that their income fact should be stronger than the substitution fact. So that's all for the analysis side evaluation. You cannot get full marks unless you do evaluate this concept. The extent to which can be used, the extent to which this is evaluation. So first of all, we need to take some assumptions. Unless those assumptions are met, this analysis cannot hold true. So first and foremost important assumption is that consumers are rational and they are willing to maximize their total utility. And they make decisions with perfect information. They have perfect information. They are not influenced by advertisement. They are not influenced by peer pressure. They do not. They are not influenced by branding and packaging and colorful marketing. They are rational. They can rationally compare value of a product, the benefit of a product, the satisfaction of a product with its price. They are in a position to compare the utilities of two goods. They are in a position to compare the utility of two packages or two bundles or two combinations of goods. They are prudent, they are rational, and they are able to make decisions without any situation of uncertainty. If these assumptions are held true, the analysis will hold true as well. I hope you like this video. Thank you very much. Video, thank you very much. Video, thank you very much. Video.